We're very honored to have the president of the Wild Foundation, Vance Martin, with us, who's going to talk about the state of wilderness worldwide. Hello, Vance.
Hey, how are you?
Good. I hope you are too.
Good. Very good presentation, Tanya. Thank you if you're still on. And great effort by you guys at EWS. Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here and to spend some time with you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, then I will give you the floor.
All right.
Yeah, looking forward to the rest.
I'll have the floor and the screen. How's that?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, good. Let's share the screen. Here we go. And we'll take off, okay? How's that? Are we there?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, good. Well, just to start off, thank you very much for inviting me to participate, and to all of you, congratulations. This is a very important effort. I love it when I see people really paying attention to international perspectives on wilderness and information and sharing and helping each other. I've been doing it all my life, and it's great. So thank you very much for what you're doing. We're going to spend just a few minutes, just 2 or 3 minutes, talking about the Wild Foundation and what we do, and then get into protected areas in general, just very general, and then sort of how wilderness fits in and what the status is today, and then we'll have some questions. So I'll just keep moving on here. Okay, so why is that not? Try that. How's that? We actually started in Africa. We were born in Africa. This man these two men are our founders. That's Ian Player and Makubu Ntombela, his Zulu brother, guide, friend, mentor for many, many years. They worked together with a team to save the white rhino from extinction. And that was in the early 60s. They sent them all around the world. They pioneered the techniques to do this. It was a multiracial, very diverse, multi-sectoral team, inventing in the bush all of these techniques that are still used. But at a certain point, they realized that wilderness was more important in some ways than wildlife, because wilderness taught us so much. So they realized that wildlife was really not the issue, that we needed to save the wilderness. And so they started the Wilderness Leadership School in South Africa. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And I'm fooling with my settings here. I hope this is still visible to everybody. So for 45 years now, we've been working, we're based in the US, but we're working internationally, trying to combine these concepts of wilderness, wildlife, and people, because we're all part of the same whole, and we need to act as we're one whole system, not just protecting wilderness and wildlife, but also working for the benefit of human communities. We have a values framework in our mission, because we feel that how you do the work is every bit as important as what you do. So these aspects of collaboration, creating good, important, practical solutions, and also using culture. Culture is so underrated as a solution, and we have a little saying that culture is not just entertainment. Culture is a vector for solutions. It is equal to science and to policy. So we work a lot with cultural approaches so that people can understand how wilderness relates to them. Here's a few of our projects. This is our largest field project. This is in West Africa, Mali, a very unique herd of desert adapted elephants. And there's only 2 of them in the world, one in Mali and one in Namibia. but this is a community empowerment style of conservation. So we work with 16 different ethnicities in an area the size of Switzerland. So we do a number of field projects. That's our largest one. We do experiential model, the Wilderness Leadership School. So our colleagues in Wilderness Foundation Global, because we're an alliance, we still run programs throughout South Africa and Botswana, and over 60 years have taken 65,000 people, many of them underserved youth from the townships, also business people, politicians, taking them in small groups, no more than 8 people, 5 days, a real wilderness experience, sleeping on the ground, leave no trace camping, and it's still going on. And we welcome you to the Wilderness Leadership School in South Africa. We also have Coalition Wild that we launched at Wild 10, the 10th World Wilderness Congress in Salamanca in 2013. And that's just growing like mad. It's a fabulous network. If you want more information on that, it's coalitionwild.org, or it's on our website too, wild.org. And of course, most of you probably know we've done the World Wilderness Congress for many, many years, since 1977, all over the world, every 3-4 years. We really seek to bring people together from diverse areas and create practical solutions. What do I mean by practical solutions? The Global Environmental Facility, GEF, was started at the 4th World Wilderness Congress, which was in the States, in Colorado in 1987. I lose track sometimes. International League of Conservation Photographers was started at the 8th Congress. Wild Wonders of Europe, many of you have seen that. That was also an idea that Stefan had at the 8th World Wilderness Congress, and he created that. Many things like that. Funding mechanisms, new organizations, field projects, a lot of stuff goes on. The 11th Congress was planned for March. It was postponed due to the pandemic. It was a great disappointment to all of us. And we will continue. Right now, with the IUCN meeting and the CBD, the Convention on Biodiversity meeting, still up in the air. IUCN has been postponed again until late 2021. So we're setting no dates, no plans yet, but well, actually we have plans, but no date yet. It may be back in India, or it may not. And maybe we'll call it Wild 12, because there's been a lot of outcomes already, and I'll go into a few of those later. As a result of the planning, we just kept rolling and have produced a number of outcomes, actually. We have a big question, a big framework about wilderness. We think it's important to really understand how much space is needed. This was not a question people were asking 15 years ago. It was, okay, we'll have some protected area space, but this has become what they call spatial targets, has become a real issue. And as most of you know, it's right on top now. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But our framework, as some of you may know, is called Nature Needs Half. It goes, it's a science and traditional knowledge-based vision. And you know, it's all about protecting enough wild nature so that life on Earth can survive, and not just protecting it, interconnecting it. Connectivity, as we all know, is extremely important. So it's a very big vision. We launched it at the 9th World Wilderness Congress, which was in Mexico in 2009. Many people weren't thinking in those terms then. There was not a lot of acceptance of it, but look how far we've all come. This 30 by 30 movement now is taking over. 30 countries have endorsed it. There's even legislation being promoted in the US Congress of all places. People realize that we need to go big. We need to be ambitious. And you know, people sometimes say, "Oh, you can't. Only rich countries can save so much nature," but it's not true. Here, you know, Namibia is a great example, but look at Bhutan as well. They've saved half of their wild nature as well. But this doesn't have to be these large wilderness areas too. I mean, urban wilderness is a bit of a misnomer. There really is no such thing. There are wilderness areas very close to cities, maybe even part of a metropolitan complex. But look at this. Here's Hong Kong. This is Kowloon, what most of you think of as Hong Kong. Most people don't know that Hong Kong's new territories, all combined, have 42% of their area protected for biodiversity purposes. So there's many different ways we can achieve protecting nature and restoring nature. Here's a general look at where we are now. You know, with the Aichi targets, were set as part of the Convention on Biodiversity. They set it at a 10-year goal at 17% of the Earth's land surface and 10% of the oceans and marine areas. You can see how far we've come here. We haven't quite made it. Management effectiveness of these areas is also an issue, but you have to have a target. And you have to manage well, and you have to save high quality or restore to high quality wilderness. So some of the other things we do, international wilderness law and policy, we sort of, when I got involved in this, there was no international definition of wilderness. There was the US Wilderness Act and a few others. The IUCN didn't recognize it. This was back in 1977, we started on this. And it's been a long road, but it's just growing very, very quickly. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we've done that. So many policymakers, once they got the light, they asked me, well, how do we do it? So we developed a toolkit over the years. At the far left of the screen, you can see the international handbook on wilderness law and policy that's been translated into French and Spanish. We do a journal, 4 journals a year, and we work a lot with indigenous communities. We have a very, very clear policy on wilderness, that it does not exclude people. It excludes certain human impacts. And we work very closely with many indigenous communities all around the world. In 2002, we founded the Wild Foundation, founded and remains a co-chair of the Wilderness Specialist Group at the IUCN, part of the World Commission on Protected Areas. The book you see to the left is the first guidelines. We launched these in 2016 at the IUCN Congress in Hawaii, and they're the first set of guidelines for one of the IUCN's categories, and wilderness is category 1B, as many of you, of course, know. These guidelines are very specific, and our representative in China, Zhang Chen, I know she made a presentation, I believe, yesterday, and she's the manager of the Wilderness Specialist Group, and she went into a lot of the details. But I'll just re-emphasize one aspect that we feel very strongly about, that the importance of indigenous and local communities in determining wilderness values and wilderness protection that benefits them and benefits the world. We work all over the world. We're a small organization, but we work and we have our leverage and our reach because we collaborate. We help people. This model, working with local communities, many of whom live in or near wilderness areas, is one of the most important aspects for the future of wilderness conservation internationally. Little quick rundown here. Of course, back in '64 was the Wilderness Act in the USA. There were 54 areas at first. Now it's 5% of the United States, 803 areas. The work that we started in 1977, it took us 15 years to get the category in the IUCN, and that was in 1992. And right when they made the category, there were 48 areas registered. And by 2016, category 1B is used in 70 countries with more than 3,000 different areas. And there are many more that are simply unregistered as category 1B. I'm always a believer in asking the right questions. And so when, we're all wilderness advocates in this meeting, but so much of the time we have to talk to people who don't understand wilderness. So we're always explaining what is wilderness, because it's our life work, all of us. The word means many different things to many people. There's a wilderness party in Oxfordshire in the UK every year. I mean, whatever, right? But they call it wilderness. And when I talk to people, it's very clear that some people think that it's just a protected area. Some people think it's like just a descriptor of a certain type of condition, like a general term. And some people have a great sense of reverence and of the sacred within wilderness. And I think everybody on this call can relate to that very much. I refer to it in my own self as a three-dimensional concept. There's biological importance, there's social importance, and there's this iconic, inspirational, mysterious component that I think drives all of us. It certainly drives me because it's the wilderness that has taught me so much about myself. But everybody has definitions. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there's, every country has a different definition, slightly different, but they all deal with, generally size and remoteness, lack of infrastructure. We all know this kind of thing. I'll just say that the Finnish Act in 1992 was the first original act that also addressed indigenous needs. The US Wilderness Act did not do that originally, but did it later in what was called ANILCA, the Alaska National Interest Lands Act, Conservation Act, where it modified a lot of the wilderness criteria in order for indigenous Native Alaskans to use the wilderness and its, pardon me, and its resources in a way with snow machines and things like that. So these are called variances, technical term in wilderness law, in order to accommodate either indigenous or other important uses. So a little bit of the history here very quickly. Protected areas really started with indigenous hunting areas and sacred areas. The New Forest in the UK was, back in 1200, was really used the wilderness kind of concept, not the word for the first time. Then Doñana was proclaimed in Spain, of course. And then Umfolozi, the first wilderness area, was declared a protected area. It was the first protected area in Africa, not a park, but the first protected area. And then, of course, it was the first declared wilderness area in Africa as well. But by the late 1800s, things began to really move, and the whole national park movement started, as most of you know, with Yellowstone National Park. Adirondack Park in America has that famous saying, "Forever wild." There's worldwide protected areas just grew, and then finally the Wilderness Act in America, which is considered to be not just our Wilderness Act in America, but wilderness acts in general, national, is considered the pinnacle of land and sea conservation because of the values it preserves and its future vision for a healthy earth and a healthy people. And it includes indigenous people. Here you have the Mission Mountains Tribal Wilderness Act, started in 1982 in Montana. We work very closely with the Confederated Salish and Kootenai people, and they proclaimed it for one reason. It was a sacred area. It was an area for their icon, the grizzly. And it was an area that they went to go for inspiration. And it was an area from which their water came. So a fantastic example. So here's the countries that have legislation, national legislation. There's not many of them, but many, many more countries, as I mentioned, over 70, use the category as an administrative declaration. But national law is always the goal if we can do it. And you don't need to use the word wilderness. I mean, we list Russia because their zapoviedniki is very, very similar. And so we include it because it's the same values, okay? Inventories are so important and so difficult. We promoted the first one at the 4th World Wilderness Congress, 1987. The Sierra Club, Mike McCloskey and Heather Spalding did it. This was pre-digitization. So they did it on maps, navigation maps, large. And it took them 18 months. And that was 1987, and their finding was 33%. Of course, it was also areas of 100,000 acres or more, call it 40,000 hectares. That was the scale that they used, no infrastructure, et cetera. And there's been many other, here's 4 of them here. And each one used slightly different criteria. And then more recently, this was the one that Russ and his team did at Conservation International. And you can see at the bottom there, those are the criteria that they used. And then most recently, James Watson and his team revived the human footprint model. And they're still saying sort of 23 to 27%. Remains, but a lot of this also is high altitude. But I have an issue with some of these inventories because when we see the inventory, we automatically think, well, this is how much is left. But it's actually not true because most of these are very large scale, okay? Whether it's 40,000 hectares, James, I believe their criteria was not, they only looked at areas 100 square kilometers and over. And we can't leave out the smaller areas. They are key to saving wilderness, saving biodiversity. And there's a lot more of it than maps like this would indicate. So we're a very big advocate when you look at these countries where most of the wilderness is. This is large scale wilderness. We need to work locally and regionally. Use our mapping like Steve Carver and his teams do, and other people. We work extensively with colleagues in India and China. And you can get the scale down, and then you can begin to see where connectivity is really important. So please don't forget this, and please keep up your local work, because this is what really shows us about wilderness and its values and its benefits, especially to local areas. But when you add it all together, what a global asset. So what's next? Priority number one, if we want to address climate change, species extinction, and pandemics, intact wilderness area is number one priority. It's most cost effective, hands down. And if we stop destroying wilderness, we address all of these quickly, okay? Priority number two is restoration, of course. There's a lot of areas, land and sea, that need to be restored, rewilded. I believe that rewilding is the most important activity. I mean, protecting wilderness is an activity, but actually one that can, rewilding can, it's an economic boost, it's a health boost, everything. It is very fitting that the UN will have their decade of restoration starting in January. And this is from Nature magazine just this year, that just by protecting wilderness and restoring it, how quickly we can move ahead on carbon and climate and species, and of course pandemics. This is a picture of a wildlife overpass in Montana, and this is one of the great infrastructures of connectivity. Why isn't there a law when you put in a road, you put in an overpass or an underpass? Why is that not a law yet? It only makes sense because the carnage with our wildlife and the damage to the gene pools is so extensive. Anyhow, it's starting. About 10 years ago, it began to move, but we have a long way to go. So one of the products of Wild 11 planning was the Global Charter for Rewilding the Earth. It has 100 groups, signatories in the Alliance. It's also now a recognized partner of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And we're moving that alliance forward on a number of fronts. And, you know, people in Europe are doing a lot of rewilding. In India, a lot of work is going on. China has some massive programs. The criteria is always a little bit different, you know, but let's get away from these just plant trees concept, because I love trees. Trees have taught me so much. They've really been my biggest teacher, actually. But yet, just plant trees is not the answer. I think we all know. We need the biodiversity. We need ecosystem restoration, not tree planting. Yeah, I think you all know that. We've worked a lot with transboundary conservation. That's a very important next step. I work a lot with the Peace Parks Foundation and others. This area between Mexico and the USA came about as a result of Wild 9 in Mexico, the 9th Congress. This is Secretary of Interior from the US and the Secretary of Environment from Mexico signing the papers on the border. It's about 3 or 4 million hectares, not all strict park. There's private conservation areas, state conservation areas, and national. And we have to look to the oceans. You know, the concept of marine wilderness, no-take areas, absolutely essential. Get rid of the plastics, you know, all of that stuff. And I'm going to return to this theme. Indigenous peoples, the communities, the cultures, 80% of the intact nature that is left is occupied. It's homeland. That's why our work together with our Indigenous brothers and sisters is so terribly important. And as we work together, we can really combine our science and their traditional science. Some people call it traditional knowledge. It's a science, okay? This is Inner Mongolia. I was there last year, and you've got great examples of nomadic uses of these areas that are not overgrazed. Some are, some aren't, you know, so it is possible. When people ask me, what's the real value of wilderness? What's it really about? This is what I tell them. You know, it's life insurance. And you don't have to pay for it. You just have to take care of it. So we say there's a new revolution. This is the scope of the revolutions that have swept across the earth and human society. Well, right now, we're calling for a survival revolution. And that includes protecting wilderness and restoring wilderness for human well-being and all life on Earth. So join us, the survival revolution. So finally, what do we need? We need wilderness. Everybody here knows that. I salute all of you, and I say thank you for allowing me to participate. And I look forward to any contacts that we have, answering any questions now. My email is very easy, vance@wild.org. Thank you. Hey, Max.
Hey, it was always nice to listen into you.
Congratulations, Max. This is a great effort. It's super.
Look, I was so keen to go to Wild 11, and we were going through this COVID, and now we see these dramatic increases again.
Yeah.
And we have this very young, energetic team, and I just chucked the challenge at them. And
That's great.
Pulled this together. They pulled this together, and
fantastic.
Just you're going to hear something we were going to announce in an hour from now. but we will do it again next year. We will
Oh, good.
structure it a little
Super.
bit more precise in having this the wildlife in one block and the wilderness in the second block, because you know, on first time you learn, you
Oh,
improve,
yeah.
you learn from it.
Mhm.
But
Great.
everybody thought we would have much more trouble and difficulties, and guys like you and Ed Zanis that was on board, and we are leading a big discussion in the background with John and Laura and Shan about intervention, non-intervention, the point and ways. Big topic is coming up here. And that's what I love about these get-togethers. It inspires people again to maybe dig in the past, look into the future, look at maybe even the Wilderness Act from 1964 should be looked at. Maybe you need a 2.0 version of it, because we have moved so far down the line. It is amazing that we are still stuck a little bit in the past,
Yeah.
knowing what we actually have to face at.
Yeah, good. Well, look, let's keep collaborating. Let's keep working together.
Absolutely.
And as we set our plans, you know, what we found is I've done a lot of surveys and talking to a lot of people in the last 6 months. Where do we go from here, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so glad you've done this, to keep that momentum going, keep people communicating. But what everyone has told me, you know, some people say, oh, the world, the age of a lot of travel is over. People don't want to travel. You know, every single person I've talked to said, don't lose the personal part of it, the gathering part of it. Let's do the digital. Absolutely. Let's do it better as you're exploring. And let's also have a place where we can gather occasionally. So let's work together, okay?
See, Vance, I think you made a very good point there. And maybe what we could do is, I mean, whether you sit in a room and listen to the presentation, or you listen this way over different time zones. I mean, look, you're in a different time zone than me, and Shan always got midnight in her place. But we could actually combine the two, that the trips, the on-site, would have a different quality. So I'm just chucking out this challenge to both of us, that if we go somewhere and we do spend the travel time, we should actually not spend the time sitting in conference rooms, because we could do the conference room bit of like this, but organizing these on-site, talking to the people, sitting down and exchanging. You said a nice saying, what you all learned from trees. What can we learn being out there is a different quality. And you're absolutely right. And gathering there, having a powwow in China, in the middle of Mongolia, may do more for us than what we used to do sitting in, remember Salamanca?
Yeah.
It was a beautiful place. It was excellent. But why don't we spend more time in the field if we get together and we do the presentation part online? What do you think?
Hey, listen, all of the above. Absolutely. Okay, thanks, Max, so much. I don't want to take any more time.
I will reach out to you. We are
okay,
looking
great.
currently at the 18th to 22nd of October. Preliminary.
Okay.
Preliminary. I will get in touch with you next week. We first have to recuperate from 6 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
You know how this is. You know how it
yeah,
works.
I do.
The team has earned the pizza, so we will get together and celebrate. And I will
don't forget the beer.
Yeah, and we will find out on how we can combine and link and support each other. Okay, Vance?
Super. Great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Vance. I'm sure you and Max could discuss for hours, but yeah, we have to move on to our next presentation.
Time's up. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you again. It was really an inspiring presentation, going back to the very basics of the wilderness idea.